Yalskar didn't speak for a brief second. He seemed unsettled by my sudden glare. His eyes darting away from me and to his crops, to the wall, to the sky, and anywhere that wasn't directly towards my view. He spoke abruptly. "We're done here, Alchemist. Your little story doesn't concern me or the town. Take it up with the guards in the next city. I want you out of my garden, now." I was unsure if he'd noticed what I'd seen as well. This sudden urge to kick me from the ground certainly made it feel as though he knew the thought that had just run through my mind. I wasn't going to take the time to find out exactly. Quickly turning about on my heels and walking towards the gate in a fairly mild pace. Figuring it was in the best interest to try and divert the subject, I responded, "Fine. If you care not for such concerns, I shall take my leave. It was far too hopeful of me to seek aid for something you'd just find so petty." It was unfortunate that had to be said with such a sarcastic and demeaning tone, for his attitude had been endured long before this conversation. Many, many years ago to that point. It was impossible to keep from such an aggressive voice, clearly setting a blaze of rage within him as he threw the iron gate open before me. I followed the same path we had, Yalskar keeping to my tail at a very discomforting distance. He had his eyes on me without a doubt, possibly even reaching for his blade. That thought helped greatly as my pace increased. The only thing to do now was to get back to the center of town. But what after that? There was no single person I could speak to over this matter. Perhaps now would be the time to let it out loudly. To gather the entire village's ear and let them know of the atrocity that I'd seen. They'd know who it was that committed such an act. I reached the circle in no time, the group still dancing about merrily without pause. With a deep inhale, my voice could roar across the entire landscape, had it not been promptly cut off by a panic-stricken shriek behind me. I turned to see Yalskar, partially undressed to the point of looking like a ratty street beggar and nothing more. He scowled wickedly and pointed in my direction. "Thief! Thief! Guards! That man assaulted me as I tried to speak to him in good conscience! Seize him immediately!" It took a brief second to realize what had just become of everything. In a mere instant, I went from attempting to bring justice to the town to being hunted by every last person within its walls. The band silenced. A collection of gasps and murmurs vibrated through the thick of the crowd. The clank of arms came about. Two armored soldiers in the same attire from the man at the very front gate stepped forward. One unsheathed a sword, the other readied a nasty-looking pike while moving hastily at me. Yalskar kept his distance, surely a smirk underneath his false breaths. There was no way to talk out of this situation. The Earl had marked me as a criminal. No amount of evidence or remorse would undo that. The guards would either kill me or imprison me until death. It had been a mistake from the beginning to ever trust him again. As the two guards enclosed, the people watched in absolute awe. Not a single one coming to my aid. Perhaps I'd gone too far this time. Maybe offering my help, trying to let them know a murderer had been among them, was just a waste of my time. Perhaps this town did deserve to rot, and I wasn't going to be rotting along with it. Two guards dressed in clunky armor would be no match for my new speed and agility. Ignoring the entire group, I launched off the path towards the market buildings. The two soldiers must have been taken by surprise, unable to even comprehend the sudden burst of speed. They began to pursue as quick as possible. Not a single chance of catching up. Yalskar's voice echoed through the hills in pure rage. That was far more satisfying to hear than imaginable. Knowing the bastard was so irritated and even enraged, and specifically about me. I would make it to the gate as soon as I could and leave the city behind yet again. Cast aside not only as a madman, but a criminal now. The thought burned in my mind while making my way down the hill. To hell with them all. A sudden whistling passed overhead, a broad-headed arrow piercing into one of the shop signs directly in front of me. It swung along the hanging chain from the impact, splinters lightly floating to the ground. Wishing to avoid the same fate as the placard before me, I leapt to an alleyway behind the buildings on my left, just hoping it would lead in the right direction to get back to the fields and through the doors. A short corridor of twists and turns was now where I found myself. It hadn't seemed this complex when I was walking in. I darted through the alley, dodging all of the storage crates and barrels in the way as quick as I could. My path was a pure guess at this point, a guess that would pay off in the end without a doubt. I tried to gain my bearings and figured the main direction to the gate, trying to maintain that route. I reached the end of the path, a large wood gate at the last section of the alley. With all my force, I braced my shoulder and charged directly into it. The gate gave way with little resistance to my pummeling rush. It swung wildly in front of me, slamming loudly into the wall behind it. Like the sun on the horizon, the gate to the outside of the city glowed through the doorway in the distance. It was open ground nearly the entire way between me and the way out now. I had to move quickly to maintain my distance from those bowmen, lest one of their arrows finally were to find its mark on my heart. Behind me, the sound of rabbling voices and vicious yells could be heard, bouncing about as they moved through the market with clanking armor and commands. It was hard to tell if they'd lost my trail or knew precisely where to go. At this point, that hardly mattered. My feet swiftly glided over the path. It was the much quicker route to take, although dangerous to be out in the open. The crops could provide worthwhile cover to keep me concealed, but they would slow me down far too much. I let go of such a concentration and focused all of my energy into my rush. The gate already towering overhead as I drew next to it. A cry came forth from the midst of the fields behind me, one of the bowmen cleverly hopping up from within, arrow knocked and ready as he called out in alarm. I gripped the wrought iron ring to the doorway, tugging fiercely on it, only to be greeted with a chunking metal noise. It was barricaded. In fear, I turned to see the glistening eyes of the bowman beneath his helm, staring directly into my soul, as he bid me a farewell, loosing his arrow. The gods graced me with a luck unheard of this day. The sheen of light off the arrow's broad head glimmered as it passed mere inches away from my brow. It buried itself deep into the door behind me, leaving me untouched and the bowman grunting in angst whilst readying another upon his string. I spun around and took a brief look at the door, a wooden bar laid against it in a locked position, keeping it sealed shut. There was enough time. I knew there had to be. I forced my hands beneath the barricade and hoisted up with all of my might. The large oaken bar lifted above the metal slats holding it in place, falling to the ground before me with a hollow echo. That soldier surely had another arrow at the ready. The door was unlatched. It was time to get out for good. With yet another tug upon the iron rings, the door made its familiar creaking groan as the passage opened. As soon as there was enough space to fit, I sidled through the slit and out into the corridor. The thud of another arrow hitting the wooden boards echoed through the hallway. I didn't pay much mind to it now, and focused on breaking away from the village, out into the forest beyond to hide. I could run home and forget everything. Never return to this place and be branded as a traitor forever. It was a tempting thought. I had no reason to return here, nor to care what was thought of me, even if it was a complete lie. I could simply live in peace again. Curiosity and fate had other plans for me, however, as I'd soon come to find out in that deep forest beyond.